to Economy Insight Malaysia 2026. I am Farah, your host for tonight's special broadcast. Tonight, we will analyze Malaysia's economy outlook based on article published by The Star on 19 May 2026 entitled Domestic Demand to Keep Economy on Steady Roots. The article highlights how Malaysia's economy continued demonstrating resilience despite growing global uncertainty. Strong domestic demand, household spending, and export performance are helping Malaysia maintain stable economic growth in 2026. However, inflationary pressure, geopolitical tensions, and global economic instability continue posing serious risks of the economy. In tonight's report, our team will analyze several key macroeconomic concepts, including gross domestic product and economic growth, inflation and the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, monetary policy and its role in maintaining stability, and finally, our recommendation and conclusion. We begin now by going live on our field reporter, Aida, who has more on the ground situations. Aida?
Thank you, Farah. According to the article, Malaysia recorded a GDP growth of 5.4% during the first quarter of 2026, a figure that exceeded initial market expectation. Analysts believe demand will continue supporting economic growth throughout the year. Domestic demand refers to total spending activities within the country, including household consumption, business investment, and government expenditure. The article also highlights the strong performance of Malaysia's electrical and electronic sector, or E&E, which continues contributing positively to the country's export. However, several downside risks remain on the horizon. These include rising inflation projected to reach 2.1% to 2.5% in 2026, global supply chain disruption caused by geopolitical conflicts, slower global economic growth affecting demand for Malaysian export, and threat to critical maritime routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Such issues may affect consumer confidence, raise production costs, and challenge Malaysia's economic momentum in the months ahead. Our team of analysts will now break this down, starting with Nadia, who will remain how GDP and aggregate demand connect to Malaysia's economic growth.
Thank you, Aida. Let's begin with gross domestic product, GDP, the most fundamental measure of how well an economy is doing. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced within a country over a specific period. Malaysia's GDP grew 5.4% year-on-year in Q1 2026, showing the economy remains productive and active. But this is lower than Q4 2025, which is 6.2%. Signaling a natural cooling as the post-pandemic recovery pace matures. The recent growth is holding up despite global pressure comes down to one thing: strong domestic demand. In macroeconomics, we capture this through the concept of aggregate demand, the total spending in an economy. Aggregate demand has four components. First, C, private consumption by household, I, business investment, G, government expenditure, and S-M is net exports. In Malaysia's case, private consumption is the biggest driver. Malaysians are still spending because employment is stable and incomes are supported by government programs. On the supply side, firms holding 3 to 4 months of inventory can keep producing even if import disruption occur. And Bank Negara Malaysia RM5 billion SME Stabilization Relief Facility ensures small businesses can access loans and keep operating, which preventing a drop in aggregate supply. The result is what we see in the AD-AS model. The economy moved from equilibrium E0 to E1 with higher real GDP of output at a slightly higher price level. This matches the article's expectation, which is a positive growth alongside mild inflation. I now pass to Shazwani, who will cover inflation and the business cycle risk in more detail.
Thank you, Nadia. While Malaysia growth is positive, the article highlights serious risks, and the first is inflation. TA Research forecasts Malaysia's CPI inflation will climb from 2.1% to 2.5% by year-end 2026. This is driven by two forces simultaneously: strong consumer demand creating demand-full inflation and disruption to global supply chains like the Strait of Hormuz blockade causing cost-push inflation. In terms of business cycle, Malaysia is currently in a late expansion phase, still growing but beginning to slow before reaching its peak. Employment remains resilient, supporting consumption, but rising prices are starting to erode purchasing power. On the supply side, the Strait of Hormuz conflict raises freight costs and production input prices, shifting the short-run aggregate supply curve to the left, resulting in higher prices and lower output if left unchecked. This is where fiscal policy steps in. The Malaysian government has maintained fuel subsidies, keeping the RON95 at RM1.99 per litre, well below the market price of RM2.87. This is a direct fiscal policy intervention to protect household disposable income and keep production costs manageable for businesses. However, sustaining these subsidies increases the government expenditure, risk widening the fiscal deficit and may raise national debt over the time. This is the key tension in fiscal policy, short-term release versus long-term financial sustainability. On monetary policy, Bank Negara Malaysia is holding the overnight policy rate OPR steady at 2.75% throughout 2026. A stable OPR means commercial banks maintain predictable lending and deposit rates. This reduces uncertainty for businesses investing and household borrowing, supporting steady money circulation in the economy. Meanwhile, BNM RM5 billion SME facility injects targeted liquidity to support small businesses, complementing the stable interest rate environment. Finally, international trade. Despite softening global demand, Malaysia E&E and ICT service exports remain resilient, outperforming global trade by a significant margin. This is because global demand for semiconductors and digital services continues growing even as other trade categories slow. However, the Strait of Hormuz conflict poses a direct risk, disrupting shipping routes, raising freight costs, and threatening the supply of imported components that Malaysian manufacturers depend on. I now hand to Nadira for our recommendation and conclusion.
Thank you, Shazwani. To manage inflation while protecting economic growth, Bank Negara Malaysia played a critical role through the monetary policy. The article states that the Bank Negara Malaysia is expected to maintain overnight policy rate or OPR at the 2.75%. By the keeping interest rate stable, Bank Negara Malaysia aims to ensure that business remain confident to invest, consumer continue spending, and inflation do not spiral out of the control. Based on our group analysis, we propose that the following recommendation for the three key stakeholders. For the government should shift from the broad subsidy to the target assistance, protecting low-income households through the program like the Budi Manani and Maisara, while reducing fiscal pressure. Additionally, MITI and the Medtrade should help firm diversity trade network forward the stable ASEAN and the East Asian partner, reducing vulnerability to the global supply shock. And the Ministry, the Human Resources must fund reskill program in AI, automation and ICT to keep Malaysian workforce competitive and protect employer stability. For a consumer, Malaysians should improve financial literacy, avoid a high-interest debt like PNBL scheme, and increase precautionary saving through the EPF and the PRS contribution. We also encourage Malaysians to buy local, supporting campaigns like Campaign Beli Barang Malaysia to keep money circulating within our domestic economy. For the firm, business, especially E&E manufacturing, should adopt a just-in-case inventory strategy, maintaining 3 to 4 months of the raw material stock to the buffer against supply chain disruption. Firms should also invest in R&D and automation, moving into the high-value activity like the integrated security design and AI-driven production to remain global competitive. In conclusion, Malaysian economy entered 2026 with a generous range. GDP growth of the 5.4% exceeds expectation. Domestic demand remains resilient and the E&E sector continues incurring our export. However, cost-push inflation, supply chain vulnerability, and the slower global trade pose a real risk that cannot be ignored. Through the target government policy, smarter consumer behavior, and innovative firm, Malaysia has a very tool need to navigate this challenge. This is not time for the core fantasy, it's time for the clarify, coordination, then encourage. On behalf of our team, thank you for watching Economy Inside Malaysia 2026.
That concludes tonight's broadcast. A huge thank you to our entire team, Aida, Nadia, Shazwani, and also Nadira for their outstanding analysis. Thank you for watching. Good night.